Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is a podcast series in which I talk to the people who make some of my favorite movies. Today's guest is Ron Bonk, best known as the owner of the New York-based underground production and distribution company SRS Cinema. Ron started out as a filmmaker in the shot-on-video world of the 1990s, writing and directing low-budget genre films like City of the Vampires and The Vicious Suite. He went on to direct several independent horror films like Clay, Miss Cannibal Holocaust, or the tongue-in-cheek House Shark. With SRS Cinema, he's produced and distributed numerous other films with splendid titles such as Amityville Bigfoot, Puppet Shark, or Cocaine Crabs from Outer Space. Our conversation revolves around a found footage film Ron Bonk made in the late 90s called Strawberry Estates. The story of a professor and a student who, along with a medium and a cameraman, venture into an abandoned insane asylum to communicate with the dead. What could possibly go wrong? Ron made the film twice, once in 1997 and then again in 1999, for a mere $400 to capitalize on the success of the Blair Witch Project. In our conversation, Ron talks about the making of both versions and how he approached the found footage aesthetic and its spirit of authenticity. He also talks about his first ventures into the world of filmmaking and how his film poked fun at the conventions of no-budget films while embracing the shot-on-video aesthetic, which has very much become a standard these days. The interview was conducted in connection with our German language podcast Lichtspielplatz. So if you speak German, please visit lichtspielplatz.at and check out episode number 68, which features an in-depth discussion of Strawberry Estates and many other found footage horror films. Also make sure to listen to our interviews with found footage filmmakers Ted Nicolaou, Brian Leslie, Stefan Avalos and Dean Alioto here on Talking Pictures. If you enjoy my conversation with Ron Bonk, please visit talkingpicturespodcast.com to check out more interviews and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So without any further ado, here is director Ron Bonk. So Ron, before we dive into Strawberry Estates, I mean, you made that in your 20s and it wasn't the first thing that you did. So you had already established yourself as an independent filmmaker at the time. But how did you get started? What started your interest in becoming a filmmaker?
I just, I grew up loving horror movies and sci-fi movies and used to make up my own stories that I would act out with my younger brother and the neighbor and kids. And, eventually it manifested in deciding to pursue filmmaking after years of, or after I'd done like 4 years of college already. And, I did a 2-year degree in accounting and I was working on a 4-year in criminal justice and decided to just throw this away and take a shot at being a filmmaker.
So would that have been your plan B to go into this direction?
I don't know if I hadn't, if things hadn't worked out as a filmmaker, I don't know if I ever considered a plan B because the main reason I went into filmmaking is because I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I realized I should have pursued it initially, and then, when I decided to pursue it, I didn't think like, oh, I'll go back to accounting or criminal justice. Like the accounting, I knew after doing it for 2 years, I was like, I don't want to do this. And then I was like, oh, criminal justice, there had been this state trooper who was renting a house up in front of our house, and we lived right on this lake called Oneida Lake. So literally on the shores, like you walk my backyard and there was the shoreline, and we would swim and play on the lake all the time. And he would patrol the lake, looking for people didn't have their boating license or fishing license, and seemed like a fun, like cush job, like just relax on the lake, all winter and or all summer. I'm sorry, not all winter. I'm not sure what he did during the winter. I don't remember, but just hang out in your boat and patrol around, and it seemed like fun, and it was good paying job. And then, but even, I don't know if, say, filmmaking hadn't worked out, even if I would have pursued that, I probably would have just kept pursuing filmmaking, or I would have done something else creative, maybe within the field, like focused on the writing or something like that.
I see. And I can imagine that accounting is something that to a creative person is really a sort of a,
Yeah.
I don't know, not something that you see yourself doing forever. But maybe, since you're also producing and running your own company and everything, maybe that sort of gave you the groundwork to do what
Oh,
you're
sure.
doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's come in handy, tracking my own expenses and doing my own bookkeeping. I don't do my own taxes, but, record all the transactions all year long and then provide it to the accountant. So it's been helpful in that terms. So, nothing was necessarily, fully wasted, even if it wasn't fully used. The criminal justice, we would, talk about different topics in relation to crime and fighting crime. And, one of the things I remember we were heavily focused on is this idea of like, preventing crime before it happens in terms of building better family structures, starting it in the
Hmm.
home. And that, was partially a genesis for one of my scripts, Clay, which was, basically
Hmm.
this, I remember thinking about it in criminal justice before I decided to, get into filmmaking. That I was like, oh, what would happen in a home with a child raised by someone who is basically insane? What sort of child would that produce? And that's where the idea of Clay, started. That was the genesis of it. So I said, it served various purposes, and there was something else I was going to comment on about that, but oh yeah, you've mentioned like accounting being very boring. Yeah, it was the exact opposite of really what I wanted to do. But when I was in high school and they're like, well, you got to pick something, to go to college for. And I remember talking to my guidance counselor, and they're like, whoa, what about accounting? It's good paying, it's an up and coming job. And I looked at it and it had a good starting salary, and it was a hot job at the time. And I was like, oh, that's how I picked it. I didn't pick it because I was like, yeah, I
Hmm.
really want to be an accountant. And I enjoyed math, but that's very basic math. That's just addition and subtraction,
Hmm.
so little, I guess, multiplication, but and division. But I mean, it really wasn't complicated formulas necessarily. So, but again, yeah, it served its purpose, I guess.
Hmm. So when you started out and made your first films, I mean, the first one that you did was like an antiquities
Oh, yeah, sure.
business film. What a deal! And then you made City of the Vampires, a horror movie, which I think is very much inspired by Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. So
Yeah, sure.
how did those? How did you move into those films? I mean, there was both. You didn't start out doing short films apparently, but
No,
full-fledged films.
yeah, I had bought my camera and I was eager to shoot, but the family business was the antique business, and I committed to going down to Florida because I'm in New York, where it's gets very cold in the winter and a lot of snow. So we had started this. It wasn't always the practice of my family, but which my father and oldest brother still do. My father's basically retired, but we started doing this practice going down to Florida for 4 to 6 months during the winter to keep selling, and we'd save up stock for it, and we'd load up the truck and drive down there, rent a place, and just there was a show every single day down there. So I'd committed to doing that, but I was eager to shoot something, and my dad had written this book that he self-distributed on the antique business. So I took that and I was like, oh, I'll shoot this while I'm down here, and sure enough, I did that, and it did really well for me. And I forget when I wrote the two scripts. I may have written them before the Florida trip, or I may have written them during the Florida trip. I forget which, probably before. But I'd written these two scripts, and City of the Vampires, I liked a little bit less than the other one. And I was like, well, it's going to be my first filmmaking venture, so let me take the one I don't love. That way, if I screw it up, and I did, it was horrible. I mean, it wasn't a good script to start, but it was okay. It had elements, that I liked about it, but it certainly could have used a lot of revisions. Obviously, that comes with experience. And the only thing I'll say about that is, I always tell filmmakers nowadays to shoot what they love, like a script that they love, because it was so much work. It was exhausting. That was probably the worst shoot of any shoot I ever did. And after the antique one went really well, so I wasn't, I wasn't prepared for this shoot to not go well. But anyways, yeah, shoot what you love. So if you can put that much energy and time into it, you want to make sure, like it's a story that you love and a script that you love and every element that you love. I think that helps you find maybe even more energy when making it too.
It's interesting that you say that your dad had this book and he self-distributed it.
Which I
So
do.
I'm kind of thinking that maybe the independent route was somewhere, I don't know, maybe in your genes in a way that you were
Sure.
thinking of going independently.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the antique business and being self-employed, my dad was self-employed, and then I used it to make money to go to college and pay for college, and so I didn't have to. I think I only worked like one or two regular jobs in my life. One was a high school, job at the high school, and another one was like concession stands at the War Memorial, which had a lot of concerts and events. But the rest of it was working for myself, my own businesses, and that was definitely influenced from the way I grew up. Yeah.
Mhm. And at the time, you were also not just doing your own films, but you were also working on other people's films. Like you shot a film by J.R. Bookwalter, and you edited and
Oh,
produced other films. Um, and I was curious because I mean that was really at the beginning of the shot on video scene,
mm,
as we call it these days. I mean, at a time when, let's say, traditional movies were really made on celluloid, and the consumer cameras just really didn't offer the quality of what
right.
people would expect a movie to look like. So I was wondering, did you have a feeling of, that you guys were developing an aesthetic of your own, or was it just something that, this is what we have available and we'll move on to something else eventually?
Probably more of the latter. I mean, I remember I took this extra year of school in film and TV classes at a community college, and I remember thinking like, oh, what if I shot on video because shooting on film is so expensive. And I remember saying this to one of my classmates, who I think was actually in TV, wasn't even in the film classes. I was doing these at a separate school from the main one I was going to, just with my younger brother. We'd go take this single film class each semester. And anyway, so I mentioned this, suggested this to this classmate, and he was like, "Oh, no, you got, you can't shoot on video. That'd be horrible." And so I kind of dropped it, and then I went to this John Russo filmmaking seminar, and that's where Bookwalter was, and he showed movies and talked about movies that he had shot on video and working at these low budgets, and I think the budgets, I don't know if you mentioned this at the time or I learned it later, but we're anywhere from 1,500. He may have even done them cheaper to 3,500. But I think I remember 3,500, I think is a number that always sticks in my head. And I remember thinking like, oh, I could raise 3,500, from the antique business. And here was someone who was actually doing it, making a living off of it and making and doing what I wanted to do, make movies. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna shoot a movie on VHS or SV. I end up, going with SVHS. To get the very best footage possible within that budget. And I couldn't afford Betacam. That those decks were still really expensive, so it was either going to be SVHS or High 8. Got my SVHS, but I think the plan was either I would be upgrading to like Betacam or 1 inch, or I would eventually go to film. But I'm sure somewhere within a few years of that process, I was satisfied with SVHS and satisfied with working with video. We would do various things to kind of make it look like film. It didn't really look like film, but when I saw like Digital 8 come along, which I shot Strawberry States on, I was like, I think I knew that it was going to evolve to a point that it was going to be able to, like, it was going to be super sharp and get closer to film. I mean, if someone came along and was like, here's this huge budget and we want you to shoot on film, and I'm so far out of film, I'd need like a refresher course, but they would provide a DP who knew how to shoot on film. And I wouldn't say no, but I do. I'm very pleased to shoot on HD or 4K. A lot of my recent projects have been on 4K, and be able to instantly see it back and be able to edit it, right on the computer at home.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of funny because these days, I mean, unless you're a Christopher Nolan or a Quentin Tarantino, I mean everybody shoots on video, and
Yeah.
the whole process has changed so much. So um, I'm not sure if I'm getting the chronology right. I think you made The Vicious Suite before you made the first version of Strawberry Estates.
I did. It was City of the Vampires. Then I did shoot a short as part of an anthology because City of the Vampires is such a failure. I was like, I need to really go back and work closer to what, like work harder on the story and really try to make what I wanted. Not only was the story bad of City of the Vampires, I wasn't able to make it really the way I wanted to because I handled like every job on that, and it was exhausting. And even though I had a lot of people who were great to work with and cooperative, it was still hard to coordinate with them. I had to fire the lead actor after several weeks of shooting with him. And I
Wow.
remember being really happy with that footage. And then I had to really kind of rush and shoot it with Matthew Jason Walsh, who only came out for like 2 or 3 weeks. I forget how long that shoot was. It was probably 3, but it may have only been 2. So I do, reshoot everything like super fast and recast the villain who would turn out to be my brother, the main villain, and my younger brother. But then, so I was like, I'm going to make these shorts, and I'm going to, experiment around with different methods of shooting them, or different ways of telling the narrative. And so I shot this one short, and I was really pleased with how it came out. I was like, okay, I don't need to quit filmmaking. There's, it wasn't like, it wasn't completely clueless. And the second one I was going to shoot was a found footage style, was going to be Strawberry Estates. And I'd read this book about a movie, and I forget the name of the movie. And I always forget the name of the movie when I talk in interviews. You think I'd go find it out, but it was shot from the lead actor's point of view. And I thought, oh, that'd be a cool way to tell the story. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just tell it through the camera's point of view. And I didn't know of any movie that had done this, and I didn't even realize, I think at the time, like how innovative this idea could be. I mean, I thought it was a good idea, but I didn't, realize like it would completely become this, subgenre of its own. But that's when Bookwalter contacted me to come out and DP The Sandman. So I put the anthology on hold, and I went out there and I shot that with him, and then I produced and shot a movie with a short with Matthew Jason Walsh, which was called I've Killed Before. Then Matt and I went back to Syracuse with the intent of making more stuff. That didn't work out. Matt ended up going home. I know he got sick during the process of us, trying to get stuff going. He was very eager to get stuff going, and I was like, I needed time to rebuild stuff, and establish the business. And I was really really trying to establish the distribution at that point. I'd only distributed, the 2 films, and I hadn't done that much with City of the Vampires. What a Deal had done well. But anyways, and that's when I wrote up the script for Vicious Suite. And I shot that, I think, approximately a year, after I'd gotten back. And then, with the partners I had there, we rolled right into Gut Pile. We shot Gut Pile, and Gut Pile stretched out for years of shooting because not only to shoot, he wanted to go back and reshoot it, and then took a long time to edit it. So right after Vicious Suite was done, we shot Gut Pile, and then right after Gut Pile was done, well, the main original planned principle was done, we rolled into Strawberry Estates. So there was like 3 right in a row. And this was the first version of Strawberry Estates. And it was a fun shoot. One of the people who worked on it was recently telling me like it was still his favorite production ever. And we had all these people together in one location. And we had like Deborah Sean and Tina Kraus on set. And all these people I'd already worked with on other projects. And so when I got the final movie done and I was looking at it, and I decided to do the lead because, I was running the camera, which was the first mistake. So I hated my acting, and I thought it was kind of a comedy. I didn't think it was very scary. So I was like, this could be a real scary idea. So I'm just going to shelve this and I'll reshoot it. And then the next year, Blair Witch came out, and I knew it was going to be big. And I was like, okay, if I don't reshoot this soon, like everyone's going to be shooting these movies. I knew all the shot and video filmmakers would be using this method. Surprisingly, not as many as I thought would do it. I thought it would just take things over. Like I think more people doing like Naturally Born Killers style horror movies on shot on SVHS or on analog video, I should say. then found footage. It seemed to be more of a slow development with that. But I was like, okay, I need to go out and reshoot this. And I revamped the script, and I was very heavily influenced from being a distributor for a number of years at that point and getting a lot of movies in that either were just really bad or they were bad in the sense that the scope that they set for themselves didn't match their budget, and they would still try to live up to the scope. So they would have stuff like an opening scroll that would detail like all these amazing apocalyptic events, and but it would never show them, and then it would just cut to, or show like some guy in front of a white wall, and the shadow would be on the back wall, and he'd be badly lit, and he'd be describing the events to you, what happened. And I'd watch the movies and be like, oh, just try to go out and show some of those events, because then it would become very small, just someone in their backyard shooting, for the rest of the movie, or someone in their house, or, just, or it even cut back to moments like that. So, and you can see that influence in the opening of Strawberry States. It started with this screen scroll, and then it cuts to a guy in front of a white wall telling a story, and then he has another guy telling a story. And it saved, all this action till basically the 1 hour point, and then after the 1 hour point, it kicks in and it's a lot faster moving. So it was a lot different than the first one. It retains some elements like the obnoxious camera person and the inflated ego driven professor, leading it, and the naive, girl assistant, and the psychic, woman who's, becomes like the key to, spoiler alert, becomes the key, for opening the door for Strawberry States to open, for Hell on Earth to open up. But the tone was definitely different. Like I said, it sort of matched this tone of being this spoof of sorts of the shot and video movies, and then there was very much a sort of God versus science theme that's debated within it, and like you had said earlier, it was influenced. Well, you didn't mention this. You mentioned City of the Vampires being influenced by I Am Legend, but was a big Richard Matheson fan, and Hell House. So Strawberry States was influenced a lot by Hell House, so, which has similar, I guess, debates, you could say, within that story.
So those were in the original and the short version too.
Yeah, but a bit in the original one too. Yeah, I would say for sure.
Was there a reason that the first version was just basically a short film of 30 minutes? Was it always intended to be like this?
It was originally feature length. And so when I went back and I used some of the footage for like a special feature on the original Strawberry States release. So you got a little taste of it. I did this cool like documentary about how Strawberry States was real, the movie was real. And then some years after that, I'd say in the last, I don't know, within the last 10 years, but maybe 6, 7 years here, I was like, well, let me see if I can cut something out of it. And so I went and I picked the parts I liked the best, basically anything that, used me as little as possible. And it became this 30-minute short, and I like it. I mean, it's fun. It definitely reminds me of that era of, like making these movies for next to nothing. That one, I think I had a pretty decent budget for it, 25 to 3,500 is probably around the same as Vicious Sweet, but the original, but the remake I did for like $400. It was in 4 days.
Wow.
Super fast. Yeah. And it was super cheap. And it was the cheapest movie, I think, even short possibly, that I ever did. But yeah, so, I watch it and I see the monster at the end and the cheesy effects, and it's fun. And I was glad to have at least released it in that form, so the people who'd wanted to see it for years could get a taste of it. Now, a number of pieces of that footage are in the documentary, but at least here it's presented in a more, standard narrative form, I guess you could say.
Was the first version shot at the same location as the second one?
Yeah, I used the same locations. Yeah.
Okay. So what about some of the stories that surrounded the building? Were all of these made up by you? Was this all, invented, or were there local folklore included?
It was a mixture. So, we learned a lot about the building on the first shoot. So when I did the script the second time, I wrote some of that stuff in, like the stuff about the unmarked graves, over on the hill. That's true. There's a whole bunch of, people buried there that, that were, they had died during, various, plagues or whatever. And I forget now all the history, but they were, they had no one to identify them, I guess. And they were buried out there. And the place supposedly was haunted. And I think some of the sightings that they talk about, were based off the stories, people who lived there or the owner had told us. And I forget, I'd have to rewatch it and really try to jog my memory how much is like exact or elaborated on. But yes, several elements of it definitely had their genesis there.
Because I like the part in the like the long version, really, where you set up, let's say, the mythology of the whole place, like everything that happened there and all the stories and everything. I mean, it really sets the mood for, basically that anything could happen, and that it's almost like there's a couple of mythologies rolled into one big mythology. Like you have the Indian background.
Oh,
like
yeah.
this was once a place where the Indian warriors came to train.
I believe it was on Native American ground. I don't, the part about training I did add in, but yeah, I did. I combined a few in there so you could kind of settle on which, one you wanted to believe or follow, or believe they all sort of work together to amplify the place, or if they all had their root, in the fact that this was one of the gates of hell and had this sort of spiritual energy, so it attracted people in different ways. They used it in different ways.
Yeah, and the personal story of the girl who sort of tries to communicate with her mother.
Oh yeah, the backstory, yeah, where her mother got lost in there, so she has her own reason, like her own motivation to come in there. It's a bit more personal for her. Yeah, for sure, yeah. And every character in there, has an arc to them. So
an interesting thing about found footage is always that it's even more than traditional filmmaking. It's a make-believe exercise. Like you're really trying to pass this off as being authentic. I was wondering about your strategies of how you ensured that this would look like an actual recording of an actual event.
I mean, I think one was doing this sort of first hour of nothing happening, and that was, like sort of a tie into like some shows that were on TV and like the Al Capone's Vault thing, where you'd watch the show and ultimately nothing would happen. And that was more common, than like something actually happening, these ghost stories or Bigfoot shows. And I forget exactly what was on at the time, or, maybe even more movies, or even just, following the folklore, the legends of, these different monsters, and constantly having them be dead ends and never proven real. So having that first hour where nothing really happens, I thought was a way to make it more realistic. Like, okay, even the camera person, he's talking pretty much right around the 1 hour mark, and he's like, "There's nothing happening here. This is just boring." And like this is a dead end. And then right after that, things really kind of kick into high gear. So even he's, and I think he even says it's like a bad B movie, like that's part of that tie into the shot on video movies, where you watch these movies and nothing would happen. And so yeah, all these things were combining, and there was something else I was going to mention about it. Oh, so and I thought the first hour is a bit top heavy with info, so you are getting hit with a lot of different stories and tales, and as the history is unfolding in between the professor catching you up on the history from the start to where we are now, you're hearing these individual stories of legends around the area or people's personal stories and stuff like that. And so I jam all this this info in the first hour, so then in the second half hour you can basically kick back and have everything you need to process or try to figure out what's happening, or draw your own conclusions to it. I mean, I think some of it's kind of obvious, like why the professor goes crazy, but maybe to some it wasn't. I don't know.
Did you also have improvisation on the set?
Oh, I have to think. I mean, I would have been open to it, but I believe they stayed pretty close to the script. I don't remember anyone moving off from it too much. They may have changed a few words here or there, but but yeah, no, I don't think so. From what best I can remember now, I think they stuck pretty close to the script. And I'm trying to remember. I know I wrote the two leads were working for me at the time, so I'd written their scenes for them, and they usually get pretty decent reviews as far as their acting in it. The other two, the psychic, which is Lisa Chalenza, she's a bit stiff, but she was like learning her dialogue on set. And I remember I would do these, pans back and forth, and I would pan over to the professor, and she'd be looking at her lines, like this, and then she'd turn back just in time for me to whip over, or I would have to like let her know, and I'd hide the edit. So when I whipped over, she would say her line. So that always hurts with acting, of course, but there was a ton of dialogue, so not everyone could get that stuff down. And then the professor, I'm blanking on his name offhand, but he, that's him to a T. That's how he would act. I would actually have to ask him to take it down a notch because he was a theatrical. But you ever talk to him, he was super like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I'm not trying to put him down, like almost sort of pompous and well, I won't go any deeper with that, but that's just if you talk to him this day, like if you ever do an interview him, you'd be like, is he playing the character in the movie right now? Oh, it's just how he is, So it's funny that people don't like him, but they're not really meant to like him. I mean, he is like the villain, I guess, of the story. He becomes the ultimate pawn. The expert. Is the one who is the most seduced, by the place.
Yeah, I think it ultimately pays off, because while I was watching it, I was thinking too that, oh, wow, this guy is over the top, and he's really like very aggressive in his delivery, even with like regular scenes. But then at the end, since the character's set up to be this, just somebody who doesn't really know what he's doing at all, and he's sort of responsible for the whole, for everything that goes wrong. So that kind of fits them. I think his name is Bob Fullenbaum. I just saw that.
Oh yeah, Bob Fullenbaum. Yep. Yeah, his arrogance definitely gets him in trouble, and aggressive is a great way to describe him, because I mean that's even in real life, but just how he talks, I don't know if he even realizes it, but he's definitely in the story, his character is very aggressive right from the start, and you sense his intimidation even of the young girl Chrissy Frick played, that was his assistant. She looks up to him and she admires him, and he really doesn't have much respect for her. He doesn't treat her very well.
So, but basically, the film was shot very traditionally, as I understand it, because a lot of times when you look at found footage films, they were sort of experimental with a lot of improvisation or stuff that the actors didn't know was going to happen, that sort of thing. So this was basically, shot like any other film that you did, in a sense, right?
Yeah. Matter of fact, we may have even shot it in order. I think so, but I don't 100% remember. If it wasn't, it was very close to in order. I think we just worked through, each started, and day one, that was the first time they were entering, and worked through each part of it. And so that helped the arc, the actors work on their arc, and keep it clearer throughout, the deterioration, in whatever direction that went, for like Chrissy Frick's character, where she just goes downhill and becomes very sick. She was able to follow that path easily, because she didn't have to go, which level of sick am I here, So in that sense, it wasn't maybe not traditionally shot, because normally we would have shot everything in the same location, but I wasn't really lighting it. I mean, I had a camera light, but I was mostly relying on, the regular overhead lights. There's one moment where the character is trying to set up like a red light, and the professor doesn't like it. But for the most part, we just, like I said, used the lights that were available there, or we used it on the camera light. And so we could, like I said, bounce from, we're shooting everything in this, dining room. We didn't have to shoot everything in the dining room that day. We can just shoot there, then go up into the hallway, then go into one of the rooms, then go into the basement, and then the next day come back to the dining room, and not worry about, is everything going to look exactly the same.
So you mentioned a budget of like $400. What was that spent on?
I think that was just spent on food, like to feed the cast. Like everyone worked for free. I had all the equipment. Like I said, I didn't light it. The place let me use the place for free. Um, I think I had a percentage deal worked out with him. And I remember a
Mm.
few years, like later when it finally came out and I released it, I sent them a check and they called me and, I sent a check specifically, to the owner in his name, and his brother called me and he's like, "What's this check for?" And I told him and he's like, "Oh, my brother passed away,
Mm.
and I'm in, just tore up the check and he didn't care if he was going to get any revenues, whatever it was the deal I worked out with his brother." And so location didn't cost me. I forget if, there might have been some gas money in there. I mean, things were definitely cheaper, back then, but um, that was probably about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I didn't hire a sound guy because I used all camcorder mic. Well, I take it back. I did, unless that was the first one. I was recording sound because I had this little disc recorder. That was fairly new technology, and I remember miking and running sound to that, but I don't remember having a crew person. I did have one crew person. I think Tim Scanlon helped me a little bit, but I don't know if he was there every day. Again, it was only 4 days, so I may have recorded separate sound for that. But when I got home, it was more like a precautionary. When I got home, I was like, I'm just going to use the camcorder sound for this. It works fine. It's been so long since I've seen it. I don't even know. Maybe the camcorder sound doesn't work. I mean, if it was bad, I was okay with it. I purposely like the one where he's on the hill. I remember, being on other sets where the wind was just blowing over it. So in the original footage, like you can hear him pretty clearly, but I added all that wind gust to just blow out the sound. So it wasn't. So when you watched it, this wasn't clean and nice and pretty,
Mm.
and all the sound was perfect. It was. I don't know if it was the right artistic choice. I'd have to rewatch it and reevaluate. But at the time, I felt like it was the right choice. Maybe I just, I don't know, wasn't loving it and figured, oh, this would be a perfect point to just kind of destroy the sound of, the scene.
It certainly adds to the sense that this is something that wasn't really meant to be used professionally, but this was just
Yeah.
something that was shot, on the go. And I was actually wondering if that was really like an unusable scene, but you didn't have the chance to do it again, and so you decided to
No,
do
no,
subtitles. So,
the sound was definitely clear for that. We may have had a little bit of wind noise because I think it was windy that day, but no, I definitely added a bunch more to it.
the one thing I was wondering about if the film Prince of Darkness by John Carpenter, if that was an influence on Strawberry Estates. Was that
Oh
something
yeah,
that was on your mind?
sure, yeah. I don't remember exactly because it's so long ago and I haven't thought about it since, but how much of an influence, but it was definitely, a movie that I loved. I remember showing friends down in Florida playing that movie specifically. So yeah, it certainly had some influence on the story and on the script. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Carpenter has a bigger ensemble there, but the professor and the student trying to, examine this supernatural phenomenon, for
That's
example.
probably more of a coincidence since that part of it because I had done those characters in the other version too. But I would say just the maybe even I mean I think the first one was a gate to hell too. Maybe it had influence on that first one too. I don't know. Maybe it just carried over. It probably did. It probably had influence. So maybe that's where some of it came from. But also, like I said, that Legend of Hell House, it influenced a lot too. So it was kind of a combo of
Hmm.
several different things. But yeah, Prince of Darkness for I would definitely say it was Carpenter's always been a big influence of mine. So
Yeah, I mean, City of Empires has a score that I think every review comments on the fact that it sounds like the
that
Halloween theme.
was yeah, that was Matthew Jason Wallace, the lead, and I didn't know going into it I was going to get that score. He really wanted to score it. He wanted to score probably more than act in it, and so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I think I'd heard a score from like Midnight 2 or something prior, so I probably had a general idea where it was going.
Mhm.
Knew he was very Carpenter influenced, but when I set out to make the project, Matt wasn't involved, so I didn't expect to have that score. But yeah, that's probably far and away the best thing about that movie is the score.
Yeah, also Prince of Darkness, the whole theological subtext of it. I mean, you already mentioned the scenes in Strawberry States where people talk about God and evil, and I mean those are really a big part of the movie. I mean, wasn't
Yeah.
expecting so much of that, and I really enjoyed that the
Oh,
characters
cool.
took their time to discuss the implications of what they were looking at.
Yeah, it's funny. Some people either told me they really enjoy that, and other people really hate it. And I guess if you're not into that debate, then the movie's not for you. They're just going to automatically lose you. You're not going to wait around for things to kick in an hour later. But for some, and it was it was something that was coming from me personally too at the time, or not necessarily at the time, but had come before. I think college. I grew up Catholic, and my mom is very religious, and college changed that a lot and created that sort of debate about how real is God? Is there really God? And that was still there. I drew off of that when I was working on the script, especially the newer script for Strawberry States.
Yeah, I think it really adds a lot of layers to it, and those are always the moments where you can sort of really distinguish it from other films. Like, those are elements which didn't have to be in the movie. I mean, the movie would obviously work without them, but they're so specific and they really add some interesting additional layer to it.
No, thank you. It's always nice to hear someone got something like that from it. So that's the intention, but it doesn't always come across either. It could be the viewer's just not into it, or my failure as a filmmaker at that making it. But it's nice to hear, and I do occasionally hear it, so it's nice to hear it.
What were the reactions in general to the film?
Initially, I mean, they were pretty good. I remember this one reviewer, I forget his publication, but it was kind of popular at the time, saying that it had the biggest jump scare he had ever experienced in a movie, and it was the swing on the axe murder, which I would have thought he saw coming, I guess. But I mean, it made him really scared that he stopped and shut the movie off and got any Romy an angry email, a fun loving but angry, like he was upset how much it had scared him. And initially the people who were seeing it were the people who knew me in the industry. As it spread more on the public, the reviews have been more mixed, but it took a few years before I really became aware, that there was definitely people who weren't enjoying it. But that happens with any production, especially when you're shooting low budget. Some people just don't, and even more so then, they're expecting Hollywood, level production on everything. And if it's the first or only shot on video movie they see, then they're going to think like, oh, this movie is horrible. But if they see a bunch of shot on video movies, then they might think, oh, this movie's pretty good. So.
Yeah, and then you hear something like, "Oh, this is not a real movie," and
oh yeah, that's the big one. I mean, you mentioned when you're going back to your question, did we think we were starting some sort of new trend? And I don't know if I fully answered that, but I definitely don't think any of us did at the time. To see it kind of come around later. My oldest nephew, when he was graduating, a bunch of his friends found City of the Vampires, maybe Dark Descent, which was the anthology that I ended up finishing after I came back from the Sandman. I put the I've Killed Before story with the Permanent Wave story that I shot before Sandman, and some other stuff on there. And they may have seen Strawberry States. I don't remember. But they came up to me and they were like, "Oh, we really loved your movie." And I remember, like, all his friends wanted to talk to me, and I was kind of like, is this a joke? Are you guys like playing? I couldn't tell if they were serious, but they really did, supposedly sincerely loved it. And it made me sort of realize, like, okay, this was a generation that grew up on camcorders, seeing themselves on camcorders, and it wasn't strange for them. And they had maybe even been exposed to a few movies that were shot on analog video and hadn't been film looked. So the look didn't bother them. And then around the same time or shortly after, like, this generation who had watched him at the time had drifted away from him for whatever reason. I don't know if a lot of them say they loved him at the time, but I'm surprised if some of them hated these movies at the time. They came back to him. Sometimes you hate a movie when you first watch it as a kid or whatever, for whatever reason. And then 20 years later, you're like, oh, actually, that movie's awesome. Like, so I think it was a mixture of that happening and people who genuinely did love these movies. So we saw sort of this resurge of interest in those, and they became sort of this elevated subgenre that people were paying like crazy money to get a hold of, and there was all these collectors competing, and I had these people emailing me, "Hey, do you have any old copies of this or this?" Or and I started digging out. I wish I'd saved more of the old stock. I ended up blowing a lot of it out, especially VHS. I wish I'd saved more of the VHS tapes because they became worth a lot of money. But some of the tapes I remember. Like I remember I had tons of copies of Abomination. I was trying to sell them off at the shows at like $1 each, and that's hundreds of dollars now if you found that one brand new. But yeah, they were all coming around and asking now, and it's basically sort of stayed, at that point. So so it did become something that I don't think if anyone said that they predicted it, I would be apt to probably not believe them because like I said, I don't think anyone, I don't remember anyone, and I knew most of the filmmakers were like, wow, we're doing something revolutionary here. We were just first at the technology, and that's what got us the status that we have nowadays.
How much did the release of Blair Witch or the perception of Blair Witch influence the reaction to Strawberry Estates?
I think it definitely helped when I was doing the sales because Strawberry Estates sold really well. For that 400, I'd stopped counting it somewhere around like 28 grand in retail sales. So it was very profitable. I don't remember if I mentioned this before. I started to. So I was like, I need to reshoot Strawberry Estates now because there's going to be all these found footage movies. And so I reshot it very quickly and released it, and I just rode Blair Witch's coattails. Now, my original intention with Strawberry Estates was to shoot it and kind of quietly release it, and I was going to advertise like in the back of like UFO magazines and stuff like that, like, is this movie real? And my problem with the first shoot of it is I didn't think anyone would watch it and think it was real. So that was one of the reasons, not only was I didn't think it was very scary, it was more funny, that I was like, no one's, I don't want to ruin this idea. So, and I think at that point I figured like this could be a really good idea. So I was going to do this quiet release, and Blair Witch, to their credit, they did it differently. They submitted to film festivals. They had this expert who guided them along the way to trim it up. And then they got a lot of buzz going for it. So it got a major release. And then they did that documentary, came out on Sci-Fi Channel. So that blew up, became like a huge release right out of the gate. I don't know if it still is the most successful indie movie, at least in terms of like the overall dollars, maybe not. If you updated the dollars from past to today, but at some point it was the most successful, and so I was like, I'm just going to go out and ride that movie's coattails and use it to help sell Strawberry Estates, and sure enough, it did. So I had retail outlets that were picking it up, and the biggest one was this one called AFES, which was the stores on the military bases. They ordered something like 1,400 or 1,600 units, or maybe even 1,800, somewhere in that range. Wow. And that was a big sale that made like a lot of the money, for it. And so again, having Blair Witch, if I'd put it out before Blair Witch, it might have just drizzled out there, and maybe it would have got some buzz if I'd done it right the first time. But coming out after Blair Witch definitely led to a lot more exposure for it fast and a lot more sales for it fast.
But also a lot of people then said, well, yeah, it's a Blair Witch knockoff. It's
I know. I did
it's a ripoff.
It's funny. Sometimes I have people come to me like, I heard Blair Witch guys ripped you, stole your idea and ripped you off. No. Like when it first came out, I remember putting something, I think on my site, I don't know if I ever did this in an interview, saying like, their idea sounds very similar to my initial ideas for Strawberry Estates was it was going to be called Strawberry Fields, and it was going to be set out in the woods. And I was like, this seems very, very similar to elements of my very original story, but it wasn't out there that much that I think that they would have actually seen it. Maybe they did. Maybe they heard I was doing it and it inspired their own idea, but they're not similar really at all outside of being, found footage. And like I said, it benefited me. But I did have some people who would ask me, and one was even fairly recent, say like in the last 5 years, and I was like, I'm surprised like that narrative is even still out there. Like they must have been digging pretty deep to have found that. But and on the reverse end, there wasn't really too many people who said it was a ripoff of Blair Witch, and I think it's because they may have been saying it more when I released it, but because social media wasn't as big, I wasn't aware of it. And nowadays, they don't necessarily know the history of it. So when they watch it, they think it's just another, there's, hundreds of thousands of found footage movies. So it's just kind of, blends in with the others, but if there was just those two in St. Francisville experiment out there, they might have, today, then they might be like, oh, it's a Blair Witch knockoff, or rip off.
Yeah, and for a while I wasn't even sure about the chronology. I mean, before watching the movie, because I saw like a 2001 release date and even a 2004 release date, and then I just sort of, after I did my research, I saw that it was this close, and there was actually the first version that you did.
I think the first version I did was 97, I want to say, and then Blair Witch came out either late 97 or 98, and then I reshot it, and I think I could be wrong on some of these numbers, but at least close. I think the reshoot came out in 99.
Mm.
So, and I don't know if there was any others outside of those two I mentioned, found footage movies out there. I remember when I wrote the script and I was out in Ohio, one of my friends out there said, "Oh, this is like Cannibal Holocaust. You ever see that movie?" And I hadn't seen it. Surprisingly, being a horror fan, I hadn't really been exposed to the European horror movies. And that one, like St. Francisville, kind of combined, like a more narrative traditional style shooting with found footage and stuff. So arguably you could say that was the very first found footage. But and there may be a few others like Cannibal Holocaust that I'm forgetting about, but really in terms of shooting on video, I think there was only the three. I can't think of any others. Could be wrong. I'm not trying to like sound like, oh wow, I made the third one, but I know it was definitely up there among the very first of all the found footage movies. So
yeah, there were a couple of them. I mean, there was the UFO abduction that was remade as Alien Abduction by Dean Eliotto. He made the first version in '89, but that was little seen because of a.
I didn't even know about this. That's cool. Wow.
It really got lost for a couple of years, and then it sort of
and
resurfaced.
That was on video or film?
That was shot on video.
Wow. Okay. Geez, yeah. I mean, I may have heard the title, but it's kind of such a generic title, I might not have realized what it was. So.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and people actually, when it resurfaced, people kind of thought that it was a real document of a UFO abduction, so that sort of became like a whole new mythology surrounding the film.
That's the hope, so if they achieve that, that's awesome.
Did some people ever think that Strawberry Estates or parts of Strawberry Estates were real?
I don't remember if anyone ever came back to me and was like, is this real? If they thought it, and then maybe figured it out for themselves that it wasn't, or just I never heard from them. But I don't remember anybody coming back to me and asking that question, or ever seeing anything posted where someone thought it was real. So, but again, this is infancy of social media, so it's hard to you'd have to hear from people directly that they'd write you letters or give you a phone call or something like that, or an email. I mean, email was around for sure.
And interestingly, after Strawberry Estates, you didn't direct for a while. You mentioned Clay, but that came out in 2007. So there's a couple of years where I saw that you did a lot of producing and working on other people's films.
I did shorts, though. So I don't know if you've seen the Strawberry Estates DVD, but there's like 5 red file shorts on there that I shot after Strawberry Estates. Because I was trying to do this concept of this like files that were being stolen from like FBI unsolved mysteries. Like someone had access and they were slowly stealing these and leaking these out to the public through like a black market. Kind of going back to my original idea of how I was going to sell Strawberry Estates, because it was going to be like, oh, some mystery guy is like stolen, government papers and video files or evidence of cases that haven't been solved, and he's leaking them out through some underground circuit of other parties who are interested in this sort of stuff, like like black internet or whatever you call
the darknet.
Yeah, darknet. Like, but before they really started talking about the darknet, like that sort of idea. And so I shot these other shorts that vary in length and subject and style. I played around with the style. Like one's mostly like security, like cameras inside a house and stuff. So I did those. And then while I was doing those, I worked on a public access show, and I started shooting a movie for their show which we were shooting off and on a few days a week for years, but the two stars of the show had a falling out, so it never got finished. And then so I kept then meanwhile, one of the stars of the show, we went and did our own public access show, which we were shooting. And after first we did like a talk show with comedy bits, and we did, a few episodes of that, and then we decided just do the comedy bits part. We did a few episodes of that, and then and it hit me like, okay, like I've been wasting a lot of time working on comedy when I want to do horror movies. And I remember I went to him and another friend who had joined us and said, look, I got to get back to making movies. This was my original intention, and I've gotten kind of far away from it. And they were disappointed and tried to talk me out of it, but that's what I ended up pursuing. And then a few years later, and it got slowed a little bit from having a baby, but I did get back to feature. So there was definitely a gap of like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years between making features, but I did, I did produce some stuff, but I definitely, did do, some narrative and sketch comedy type stuff in between that. So I stayed busy.
Have you ever thought about returning to the world of Strawberry Estates or the world of found footage?
I have, sometimes I've had this. There was a point at one point where I wanted to go back, and it might have been After She Kills, and like remake everything. I was gonna start with like maybe not this Sweet. That one I was pretty happy with. But I was gonna remake City of the Vampires, make a much better story, and then I was either going to redo Strawberry Estates or do a follow up to it, or just do more found footage. And I was going to pursue that idea of like different, because I came close to getting a development deal going for the found footage series. There was a guy I was working with who was out in Hollywood, and he was kind of a hot name at the time, and he was going to shoot a pilot for it. He had a real tough time though wrapping his head around the idea that it was just someone leaking the stuff out. He wanted to shoot like an opening that showed who the guy was, and it was maybe shot more traditional. And so I wrote out a story idea for that. And basically, by the end, the guy who's leaking the footage and gets killed, he gets killed by the FBI. Turns out he's not the actual source of it. So I continued the mystery. And he still, like, I don't know why this guy just couldn't wrap his head around that, even though he had worked on like some like TV game shows that, were kind of followed the same format. And he got a production deal for some animated show. I forget what it was, and it really tied up his schedule. So it was going to be a long time before he was going to shoot this pilot. And I got annoyed, and our contract was expiring, and I was like, I'm not going to renew, and I probably should have renewed and kept trying to work with him on it. But that was the end of doing that series. But what I wanted to do was just use the footage from the shorts and Strawberry Estates to do like a real to try to sell the idea. And the idea would be that we'd hire these guest directors who would come in and tell their own version, style of the found footage, bring in like George Romero or Carpenter or Quentin Tarantino or whoever, and say like, you make your found footage movie. Let's see what you do with it, because, and that was the idea of the shorts of the show. Like these didn't all have to be camcorder, like someone holding a camera or a camcorder, they could be, all sorts of different ways. And there was one, I even had Tim Ritter script for me that was going to do, which was a mixture of different formats, like cameras, like traffic light cameras picked up some of it, like intercut all this stuff that someone had gathered all this evidence and made like one video out of it but again, that never materialized. But getting back to your question, I think I had too much interest in the stories. I still wanted to tell like hundreds of stories that have just like I've written down anything from just a few lines to a full script to that I wanted to get to, and revisiting those, just wasn't lighting enough. Initially, it seemed exciting and fun to do, and I can go back and fix what went wrong, I guess. But then another part of me was like, yeah, I told those stories. I think it's time to tell something else. So.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that desire to remake any of those is definitely lost. It could, I mean, maybe I wouldn't shoot it myself, or if I could just shoot productions nonstop, maybe I would do it myself. But for now, no, I wouldn't shy away from another found footage, but it would have to really be something I felt like hadn't been done before, or just like this amazing story that just has to be told as found footage. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's tough these days because I mean the genre has become so big and there have been
Yeah.
so many found footage approaches and stories, and I mean it's I think impossible to see all the found footage films that are out there. So
Yeah, and even like, my sales guy will be like, no found footage, and you'll see an occasional found footage movie come out that will do well. There was one just last year or last 2 years, I think it was. I think I watched it during the pandemic. And there was a couple that were made during the pandemic too that I thought were pretty good. So every so often there is a good
mhm,
one. The one I just was doing pre-sales on and be coming out soon, Woods Witch, is found footage. I think is really funny and well done for found footage, and it's sold pretty well on Blu-ray, and I think it'll do just fine. But it has some stars in it like Tom Sizemore and Sally Kirkland,
mhm,
um, James Duval, Laurie Linkletter. So it has some names to help sell it too. But Sean C. Phillips, and he's got his own fan base, and Lauren Francesca, who's got a big following on Instagram. So those elements will help it sell and maybe separate it from the other
mhm,
found footages out there. But because there is so many, most of them just don't do anything, or most of them just aren't innovative. They're just
mhm,
um, they're just doing the same old thing, and you sort of feel like they picked that format because it was just easy for them to do it
mhm,
that way. I mean, it is easier than, say, setting up a bunch of lights and setting up the camera and mounting it down and getting your actors to actually act. You can just grab the camcorder and be like, you can literally pick up a camcorder, tomorrow and,
mhm,
and say, or today, and turn to your buddy and say, hey, let's make a movie, and we'll just go out and improv it all. But here, maybe we have a final focus point that's about Bigfoot or something. So eventually we'll get to that and have some scares in it. But
mhm.
you don't need a production crew, you don't need a bunch of lights, you don't need a script, so you can do it.
Yeah, and if it looks crappy or if things don't quite work out the way you planned it, well, that's part of the authenticity of it, right?
Yeah, it's fun when you can do a movie that way. It takes a lot of pressure off when you're on a super low budget. Like with She Kills, it was a grindhouse style movie. So, if we made it, everything was planned out, but if something happened, if there was a mistake on set, I could use it. Like there was this point where one of the characters backing up and he hits the wall and he knocks the picture off, and it wasn't in the script, but I was like, oh well, I will use that.
Mm,
Do quick jump cut where it's falling off the wall and then it jumps back up there. So and if the character was really bad, I was like, oh well, that's fine for this. A grindhouse movie. I'm trying to do it in that spirit of grindhouse movie, so
mm,
I'll use that. Or they say a line wrong, I'll use that. So and found footage definitely lends itself to that
mm.
idea, I guess.